The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus again, in reply, spoke to the chief priests and elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads, and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. The king said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet, and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth.' Many are invited, but few are chosen." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Shorts and a t-shirt. He was at a wedding and he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. Okay, now I understand this is my friend's wedding and he's anything but formal. And the shirt was collared at least. But he was at a wedding wearing shorts and a t-shirt. Now my friend did not ask that we, the guests, bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside. He did not ask us to do that. So what is so problematic then with this man not having a wedding garment at this wedding, this royal wedding? Isn't this just a superficial thing, not having the proper clothing? So I'd like to look into that. What exactly is the issue here? What with the man not having the proper wedding garment? To answer that question, we need to begin by appreciating that the wedding spoken of in the gospel reading today is, of course, a parable. It's actually speaking of the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is actually using the idea of a wedding feast to talk about the kingdom of heaven, to describe the kingdom of heaven. Now that's a complicated idea, kingdom of heaven, that encompasses the entirety of Jesus' message, that one phrase. So it's hard to make concrete, to make it to a very short definition, but I would like to suggest that we can understand the kingdom of heaven as the lived acknowledgement, that's an important phrase there, lived acknowledgement of God's reign in our life and in the world in and through Jesus Christ. So the kingdom of heaven, what this parable is talking about, is God's reign in and through Jesus Christ in our lives and in our world. And I want to underscore, Jesus is using a feast to describe the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is a joyful thing. Jesus is indeed giving us the gospel, the good news, the kingdom of heaven, a royal wedding feast. So we have that established now. So what is the man's problem? What with not having the proper wedding garment? What does that mean? How does that relate to the kingdom of heaven? One suggestion made by St. Augustine is that the man is refusing God's grace. Now, what that means, he gets that interpretation from his understanding of weddings at the time of Jesus. Now, Augustine was thinking that the host would provide a garment to his guests, so he would actually give them what they need to be properly dressed. Again, so this understanding, relating this idea to the kingdom of heaven, we can see this as somebody who refuses God's grace. For us, and contend for more Catholics, one way of looking at this might be to say somebody who was baptized, confirmed, First Communion, but ends up thinking they don't really need the sacraments. I don't really need the grace God offers us in and through His church. I don't really need the sacraments. This is one way we can kind of make Augustine's interpretation kind of applicable and understandable. So that's definitely a danger, and we don't want, of course, to do that. We do need the sacraments. God gave them to us to communicate His grace to us, His love to us. But I actually don't like that interpretation. For one, that may not actually have been the practice at Jesus' time for weddings. So he's relying on a historical fact which is probably actually not true. Secondly, his interpretation matches too well with the theological acts that he had in mind. St. Augustine's huge on grace. Grace is utterly central to his thought. So that this reading happens also to be about grace, I'm a little suspicious. So I don't like that reading very much. So we'll check out a second one, see if that one stands up better. A second suggestion is that the wedding garment represents baptism. Now this has a lot going for it. There is baptismal imagery associated with putting on new garments. That is something that exists in the early church, and even now we have practices similar to this. So in that case, the reading is talking about somebody who hasn't received baptism and is therefore not really part of the kingdom, hasn't received this essential sacrament. This reading is good because it helps us to appreciate the importance of baptism. One of the elements of which, during the rite of baptism, we say very beautiful words. I think they're beautiful words. Do you reject the glamour of evil? That phrase, the glamour of evil. Do you reject that? If we approach this reading as talking about baptism, we can be reminded of these words. We've committed ourselves as Christians to rejecting the glamour of evil and refusing to be mastered by sin. It's very beautiful, very beautiful. And we Christians are called to do this, and indeed are given the grace to do this, not only in baptism, but in the other sacraments of the church. Now this reading is also good and has something true to say. But I, again, don't actually like this reading. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The man is already at the wedding feast. That suggests he's already part of the community, which suggests he's already been baptized. So I don't like that reading either. We have one more reading left, and I think this is the one that gets it right. Some have suggested, and this is actually the more conventional interpretation, but I think it's accurate, represents somebody who has yet received baptism, in our terms, the sacraments of initiation, confirmation, First Communion, and maybe, okay, sure, I go to church when it's convenient, but I don't really live the Christian life. In a sense, I don't really believe what I profess. And that's proved by my actions. So we have somebody here who professes to be Christian, to be Catholic, but doesn't really show that in their life. There's a disconnect between what they do in church on some Sundays and what they do with the rest of their life. Of course, our Lord is not teaching us to come on Sundays to church, and that's the extent of His teaching. He's meaning to direct the entirety of our life. He's giving us the answer to life's questions. And He's asking us to put them into practice. He's begging us. He's saying, this is such joyful, good news. This is like a wedding feast, responding to this. Please respond, He's asking us. And here's a man who's saying, well, maybe. I'll respond when it's convenient. And so he's lacking the wedding garment. He's lacking what he needs to have brought to the feast to enjoy it, to really appreciate the feast. So although I think only one interpretation really stands, really teaches us what St. Matthew was writing here, I think all three have something to contribute. The first reading can emphasize the sacraments, our need for God's grace in our life. The need, it's a need. We need to respond to grace to live the life the Lord is calling us to. The second, again, helps us to appreciate baptism, the centrality of it in Christian life, and the orientation it gives to our life as a whole, which we remind ourselves of when we leave or enter a church by blessing ourselves with holy water. It's supposed to remind us of our baptism. But again, the third reading, the one I think is most accurate in terms of interpreting the text for us, encourages us to make our Christian life one whole, one unity. We go to church and we receive the grace to live the life, and then we actually go and live it. We actually love God first and foremost, and love our neighbor as a short and close second to God. The Lord has given us in His very self, not only in His teaching, but also in the Eucharist. As we approach the altar today, let us ask the Lord for the grace to respond, to make our life one united whole, committing ourselves wholly to the Lord and His teachings.